Thanks for choosing this video. I'm going to share how ex-pastors are reclaiming their purpose because you might have stepped out of the context of church ministry, but that doesn't mean that you've stepped out of your calling. I'm going to explore the sacred, disorienting, and ultimately holy in between that so many ex-pastors, leaders, and faith-driven men are walking through right now. Whether you left by choice or by circumstance, either way, you first need to know this is a season of formation. In this video, I'm going to talk about why your disorientation is actually a spiritual invitation and how to take the next faithful step without compromising your faith or sense of purpose. If you've recently stepped out of a ministry role, or maybe you're sensing in your gut that it's time, I want to encourage you because I believe you're in the right place. Maybe this decision to leave was slow and deliberate, or maybe it came like a disruption or a resignation that still feels unfinished. Either way, you've crossed a threshold of sorts, and more than likely what's on the other side is not yet clear. The good thing is you can still show up for your family. You can still be grounded in your faith. However, that doesn't mean that internally there still isn't a fog or disorientation or like this low-grade hum or this ache that's hard to explain to others. Because what used to give you a sense of identity no longer holds the same weight. You're still trying to figure out what does. Perhaps you've tried to stay busy. Maybe you've taken on projects, or you've picked up some books on purpose and reinvention. Maybe you've been journaling, spending time in prayer, you're listening to podcasts. Some days you feel hopeful, other days maybe you just feel like you're wandering. If that's you, this space is for you. You are not the only one who has ever felt like a stranger in their own life. And look, I'm not here to give you a blueprint, but I do want to offer you something that I believe is helpful. Language for what you're walking through, and a way to hold this in-between season with a little more clarity and a lot more grace. So let's talk about what this season actually is and what it's not. This season that you're in, it's not just career confusion. It's not just a break between jobs or a pause between your next big thing. This is what happens when the role that once defined you or you allowed to define you is no longer there to hold its weight. And perhaps the most challenging part about it is that most people around you don't understand what you're going through. They might still see things in you like competence, or they sense your calm in this situation. They may still see the man who could show up for the meetings or make decisions and be present at dinner. But perhaps what they don't see is the things that are swirling on the inside. The exhaustion of having to explain yourself. The ache of not being asked how you're really doing. The internal tug of war between faith and doubt and stillness and striving. You've probably heard questions like this too. So what's next? Are you excited about this new season? What are you thinking about doing now? But how do you explain that you're still grieving what was? That clarity hasn't yet come. That it's not just about figuring out a new direction. It's about learning how to carry your identity differently. There's a reason that none of the advice so far has really stuck. And it's not because you're unmotivated, more than likely, but because what you need right now isn't a strategy. You need some frameworks for telling the truth about where you really are. You need someone to come alongside you to say, this fog that you feel, it's not failure. You're in transition, and this is a holy time. This isn't necessarily either about reinventing yourself overnight. It's about making peace with the fact that you are in between and letting that be okay. You're not weak for slowing down. You're not lazy for not having the answer. And no, you're not the only one who feels like your soul hasn't caught up with your decisions. So what do you do with this in-between space? That's the question that keeps surfacing, not just in your head, but in your gut, your prayers, and it shows in your restlessness. Part of you wants to know that this isn't a wasted time or decision, that there's meaning to be discovered, that God hasn't gone silent just because maybe some of your friends and others have. The temptation is to force clarity, to try to rush ahead, to latch on to the first opportunity that offers a sense of stability, even if it feels misaligned. But there's an invitation beneath the urgency, one that doesn't demand answers, but requires presence. One that requests, before you move forward, can you be present where you are? In the work that I've done with men like you, leaders who have stepped out of ministry or roles that were meaningful to them, there's a pattern that I've seen again and again. And it's not linear. It's not just this neat thing that unfolds, but it does require honesty. And it starts not with doing, but with asking better questions. Not what's next, but where am I really? Not what should I build, rather what needs to be tended to before I move on again. Some of the most powerful work you can do during this time is rooted in soul work, not strategy. It begins with the question, why? Why am I here? What am I grieving? What's surfacing that I've tried to bury under busyness? And this isn't self-indulgence. It's about creating alignment. It's about slowing down enough to hear what God might be whispering through all the noise. Because what feels like delay might actually be preparation. In this season, you may feel like you're sinking, like the ground beneath you is shifting and growing soft. But sometimes that's exactly what needs to happen. Things need to surface. Old wounds that have maybe not been healed need to be revealed. Unspoken doubts, buried dreams, these things need to come to the surface. This is not a season to power through. This is a season to pay attention, to respond to the questions that aren't going away, to unlearn the ideas that your worth is tied to your roles and to titles and to how useful you can be. And yes, there is a path, and it may not look like progress in the traditional sense. It may not come with quick wins or tidy resolutions, but it will be honest and it will be healing. Because I believe you're not being sidelined, you are being reformed and transformed. For example, there's the man who led faithfully for years and years. He was respected, reliable, a steady voice when others were unraveling. On the outside, nothing was wrong. His sermons were still sharp, his calendar was still full, but inside, he felt like a ghost. Maybe burned out, maybe just hollow. And when he stepped away, graciously, honorably, no one told him how disorienting the silence would be. The realization that he hadn't just left a job, he left a bit of an identity that he had grown attached to. Then there's other kinds of stories. The man who didn't get to choose, the one whose role was restructured, whose church took a new direction, who suddenly found himself outside the circle that he helped build. He had been there, he was faithful, but he felt discarded, like his voice no longer mattered. And yet beneath the grief was a strange sense of relief. Like he no longer had to prop up a version of himself that had long stopped feeling true. So if you're in that place between what was and what's next, let these examples remind you you're not alone. Uncertainty isn't the enemy and that God isn't done with you. So what do you do now? Maybe you're hoping for clear answers, something actionable, tangible, measurable, but maybe that impulse, that pressure to figure it out is part of what's kept you from actually hearing what your soul's been trying to say. So instead of a list of tasks or another roadmap for you to follow, I want to offer you something simpler, something that asks you to slow down. And I want you to start here by telling the truth about where you actually are. Not where you think you should be, not where others assume that you are, but right here, in the fog, in the uncertainty, in the hope that flickers on some days and fades on others. Tell the truth. Be honest to yourself, to God, to someone who can hold space without having to fix it for you. And if you need something to help you name where you are and begin to make sense of what's next, I've created a 7-day guide that would be a good place to start. It's the same process I use to regain direction, surface my core values, and begin discerning a next step that didn't compromise my faith or sense of purpose. You'll find it by using the link in the description. That's what this season is asking of you. Not certainty, but courage. Not more doing, but becoming. You're being invited into a deeper space. And whatever shape your calling takes next, it will be rooted in something more honest, more sustainable, and more whole. You're not alone, and I believe that you're not done.